Yeah, I mean, the economic situation is pretty terrible. The biggest part of the economy is still agriculture. 60% of the population live in small villages on state farms. All farming land is still owned by the state. There's no real private farming. The state has invented something it calls private farming. It's kind of fig leaf, where there's a small number of private farms, but those people are told by the state farm what to grow, where to grow, how much to grow, who they can sell it to, and how much they'll get for it. So it's not private farming as we understand it. Cotton is the main crop, and again, entirely state-grown, monopoly purchasing by state trading companies. The workers on the farms get 2,000 some a month. That's $2 a month salary, and often that's paid late or whatever. They also get a very, very small plot of land. We're talking maybe 20 square meters on which to grow vegetables for their family and themselves, which is how they largely live. It's kind of very low level of peasant subsistence. And the state trading company, of course, makes huge amounts of profit because it's paying for cotton at about 3% of the market price. Certainly it's paying at 3% of the price next door in Kazakhstan, where it's been privatized. Then it's selling on to the world market at the full market price. And all the production figures and the amount sold, it's all the state secrets. There's plenty of room for corruption. And the labourers on the farm are the sort of peasants, are basically slaves. I mean, they're serfs because they're bonded to the farm. They still not only have exit visas, there's still exit visas in Uzbekistan to stop the population from leaving. And they have internal movement visas. So you're not allowed to leave the state farm and go look for a job in the city. You wouldn't be allowed to do it. You've got to register with the police. There are police checkpoints everywhere that would stop you. So the farm labour is basically stuck on the farms like slaves, bonded for life. If you're born on a state farm, you'll never escape. On top of which, cotton picking, which is all done by hand, is so labour intensive that even the big workforces on the state farms aren't big enough. So urban workers, students, university lecturers, people like that, are all drafted in for 3 months during the harvest period to pick cotton for nothing. All the schools, universities, they all empty. People have to go work on the farms, sleeping either in barracks or on the fields, just a sort of very meagre diet, often no good drinking water, and really genuinely enslaved conditions, including beatings and that kind of thing, and pick cotton for 3 months, including the use of child labour. Their children are 7 years old are sent out into the fields to pick cotton, picking cotton 12 hours a day, and it's the state that does it. It's not private enterprise, but the state making 7-year-olds go and live in the fields and pick cotton. And the ordinary workers get no benefit at all. It's said $2 a month. So there are massive profits from Uzbek cotton, but they're all stolen by members of the regime. Same true, it's got a very big gold industry. It's about the world's 6th largest gold producer. And again, the production figures are secret, the revenues are secret, and that allows a lot to be stolen. And about 10% of that, the revenue of the gold industry, goes to the president personally. That's his major source of his huge personal wealth. A lot of the business empire is controlled by the president's daughter, and she's been the major beneficiary of the little privatization that happens. There are also other trades. Uzbekistan borders Afghanistan, and the regime itself is heavily implicated in the narcotics trade, and in particular links between General Dostum and Karimov are very strong. And although the UN and the British government and others have spent a lot of money on customs facilities and border facilities to try and stop drug trafficking, whole fleets of vehicles between Dostum and Karimov go backwards and forwards, and they're not stopped by customs or passport control or anyone. And that's actually carrying the major narcotics trade. The Karimov family is also implicated in trafficking in women, with a large number, thousands every year, of young Uzbek women sent as prostitutes to Dubai. And again, the regime itself is implicated in all this kind of stuff.
Why do you think the American government pushes for democracy globally and in the countries in the region like Ukraine, Kazakhstan, when Uzbekistan is sort of left alone? What do you think of that?
It's a very good question. On the 26th of December, the Ukrainian election, second round, was held. The Americans made a huge thing about it, about having to bring democracy to the former Soviet Union. The same day, the 26th of December, there were elections, parliamentary elections in Uzbekistan, and the opposition weren't allowed to compete. Only political parties that support the president and support his programme were allowed to compete. The 5 opposition parties were all denied registration, and the Americans said nothing about it at all. And I think it's very simple. I don't think American policy has anything to do with promoting democracy. I think it's to do with advancing America's oil and gas interests. And you've got to remember that Uzbekistan dominates Central Asia. It's got half of Central Asia's population. And Central Asia is absolutely swimming in oil and gas. And the Uzbeks have given the Americans this huge military base at Kashi, massive Soviet air base, on which the Americans have now got at least 2 permanent squadrons of the United States Air Force there, guarded by thousands of troops. That allows them to dominate this oil and gas area. So they've got what they want in Uzbekistan. And what they're worried is any democratic regime might not let them keep that, which I think is more than likely, in fact. So, if oil and gas interests are best served by backing a dictator in Uzbekistan, they'll do that. And if to advance American oil and gas interests in Iraq they have to get rid of a dictator, they'll do that. But we shouldn't be fooled at all. I mean, you'd have to be a complete idiot to believe that the Americans are doing it for democracy. They're doing it for oil and gas. It's fairly sickening, George Bush's inauguration address, where he talked about the Americans bringing democracy everywhere and no dictatorship being safe. And then Condoleezza Rice came out with this list of regimes, Iran, Syria, Zimbabwe, etc., which America wants to replace. And of course she didn't mention Uzbekistan. Now Uzbekistan actually is probably a worse regime than any of those, but suddenly, they're America's friend.
So what has brought you from such a high position as an ambassador in Tashkent to Blackburn?
Yeah, it's an unusual journey, I think it's fair to say. Well, plainly it was impossible for me to pursue my career any further in the Foreign Office, because you can't any longer have a career in the British diplomatic service unless you're prepared to go along 100% with George Bush and go along with the war on terror. And I can't understand how Blair and Straw have managed to do this, really against the will of the British people. The vast majority of the British people are against the war in Iraq. The vast majority of the British people are against George Bush's foreign policy. So I thought, this is supposed to be a democracy, the best thing to do is to put it to the test. And Jack Straw, as the Foreign Secretary, he's responsible for the foreign policy. He was in charge of MI6 when it produced this dossier of lies about weapons of mass destruction. Jack Straw has decided that we should obtain information from torture. Well, the thing to do is come and challenge him here in his home base and make certain that all the electors know this. They know these facts before they go and vote. So that's what brings me to Blackburn.